It was a cold, foggy night in Michigan, the kind that wrapped around you like a heavy, damp blanket, chilling you to your bones. The air was thick with the scent of pine trees and damp earth, and the world seemed muted, swallowed whole by the fog that stretched across the vast expanse of Lake Michigan. The lake itself appeared endless, a dark, formless void that consumed everything in its path. Waves lapped lazily against the shore, their rhythmic sound adding to the eerie stillness of the night. For years, there had been whispers about this place, stories passed down from one generation to the next, growing darker with every telling. Some dismissed them as mere folk tales, legends spun to frighten children, to keep them from wandering too close to the water after the sun dipped below the horizon. They were nothing more than the wild imaginations of the old-timers who lived in the small, weather-beaten town near the lake. But others, they swore they were true. They believed in the legend of the Stalker of Lake Michigan. It all started with a man, a fisherman named John Blakely. He had lived in the town all his life, an unassuming man who spent his days on the water, fishing for whatever the lake would provide. He knew the lake like the back of his hand, knew its moods, its shifting currents, and the places where the fish liked to hide. He was a part of the town's fabric, his face familiar to everyone who lived there. But that all changed one stormy night. It was said that a fierce storm had rolled in, one that the locals had never seen before. The sky turned a deep, sickly green, and the wind howled as if it was alive, carrying the promise of something far worse than just a thunderstorm. The townspeople had taken shelter in their homes, huddling together in front of their fireplaces, watching as the storm tore through the town. But John Blakely had been out on the lake that night, far from the safety of the shore. The storm didn't scare him. He had weathered storms before, knew how to handle his boat when the waves became choppy, when the winds picked up. But that night, something was different. The storm raged on, and by the morning, John was gone. His boat was found washed up on the shore, battered and overturned, the sails shredded. There was no sign of John anywhere. No body, no trace. Only the boat and the ominous, empty expanse of the lake. Some said he had drowned, that the storm had taken him, just like it had taken so many others before him. But others, the ones who whispered in the dark corners of the local tavern, told a different story. They said that something had taken John, something far worse than the storm. They said that the lake wasn't just a body of water, that it was alive, hungry, and that it had claimed John's life in the most terrible way possible. Some spoke of a creature that lurked in the depths of the lake, a creature so old, so ancient, that it had been forgotten by time, a creature that could reach up from the water and pull men into its dark, suffocating embrace. They said John had seen it, that he had come face to face with the thing that lived beneath the lake, and once it had taken him, it had left nothing behind but the wreckage of his boat. In the years that followed, the stories only grew darker. The people who had known John began to claim they'd seen strange things near the lake. Shadows that moved on their own. Figures in the mist that disappeared when you tried to get a closer look. The more they talked, the more the stories spread, until they became legends. Some of the older folks even claimed that they could hear whispers on the wind when they walked by the lake at night. low, almost inaudible. Whispers, beckoning, guttural voices calling out to them, urging them to come closer. Others said they'd seen a tall, dark figure standing just beyond the reach of the water, its form barely visible in the fog, waiting, watching. "Don't go near the lake after dark," the locals would say, their faces pale with fear. "If you do, you might never come back." And while many dismissed these warnings as superstition, there were a few who believed them with a deep, chilling certainty. It wasn't just the older generation who feared the lake. Young people too began to notice things. People who were brave enough to walk along the shore after sunset reported strange occurrences. One girl, a college student named Claire, had gone out for a late-night jog along the lake a few years ago. She had always enjoyed the peaceful quiet of the lake at night. The weight of fog clung to the water's surface, and the moonlight danced off the waves. But that night, things were different. She heard footsteps behind her, faint at first, like someone was walking in time with her. When she stalked, the footsteps stopped. She turned around, expecting to see someone there, but there was nothing, only the thick fog and the dark water stretching endlessly ahead of her. She shrugged it off, thinking it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. But as she continued her jog, she started hearing the footsteps again. This time louder, closer. She picked up her pace, but no matter how fast she ran, the footsteps kept matching her stride. And then, as she rounded a bend in the trail, she saw something that made her heart stop. A figure stood by the water, tall and thin, barely visible in the fog. At first, Claire thought it was just someone else out for a walk. But the figure didn't move. It didn't even seem to breathe. It just stood there, staring at her. Its form so still it was almost unnatural. Claire froze, her breath catching in her throat. She had no idea how long the figure had been standing there. But something about it didn't feel right. She turned and ran, faster than she ever had before, not stopping until she reached the safety of her car. But even then, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her, following her every step. From then on, she told anyone who would listen to stay away from the lake at night. But just like the older folks had warned, not everyone took her seriously. Most people thought it was just another ghost story, a bit of local folklore, meant to add some mystery to the sleepy town. But for those who had felt the presence of something unnatural in the fog, the warnings were all too real. "Don't go near the lake after dark," the locals would say, their voices dropping to a whisper. "It's not safe. There's something out there, something that waits for the unwary." And so, the legend of the Stalker of Lake Michigan continued to haunt the town, passed down from one generation to the next, a warning to anyone who thought they could outsmart the darkness that lay just beyond the shore. But as always, there were those who didn't listen. There were those who thought they could handle the lake, who thought they could brave the fog and the whispers and walk away unharmed. But the lake was patient, and it never forgot. It waited. It was a Friday night when Emily, a curious and adventurous teenager, decided to take a walk by Lake Michigan. The air was crisp, the type of cold that nipped at your skin even if you wore a jacket. Her friends had dared her to do it, and like any teenager trying to prove she was braver than she really was, Emily accepted the challenge without a second thought. They had spent the evening at a nearby diner, laughing, joking, and talking about the usual nonsense teenagers did. But then, someone mentioned the lake, specifically the rumors about the Stalker of Lake Michigan. The topic quickly shifted from playful banter to the eerie legend that had haunted the town for generations. Everyone laughed at first, but there was an unspoken tension in the air. The old stories always seemed to be more than just stories, especially when the fog rolled in thick and heavy like it was tonight. Emily was determined not to be the one who backed out. She'd grown up hearing the tales, and while she didn't believe them, she still couldn't help but feel a knot of unease when she thought about them. Still, her curiosity won out. She grabbed her jacket, slipped on her shoes, and told her friends she was going for a walk. They all teased her, calling her crazy, but that only pushed her to go further. As she stepped out into the cold night, she immediately felt the drop in temperature. The fog was rolling in, thickening with each step she took toward the shore. The path that ran along the lake was narrow and often empty at night, the trees looming overhead like silent sentinels. The world around her felt muffled, like the fog was absorbing all sound, leaving only the rhythmic crash of the waves against the shore. With every step, the air grew heavier, colder, as if something invisible was weighing her down. The mist swirled in front of her, so thick she could barely see more than a few feet ahead. The trees, the rocks, the water, all of it seemed to fade into the grayness. The world felt disconnected, like she was walking through a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. Emily's breath became visible in the air, a cloud of mist that seemed to vanish before it fully formed. Her mind wandered back to the stories, the whispers she had heard as a child about the Stalker of Lake Michigan. People said it was a restless spirit, the vengeful soul of John Blakely, the fisherman who had disappeared all those years ago. Others spoke of a dark presence, something not entirely human, waiting in the fog to claim the souls of those who wandered too close to the water after dark. Of course, Emily didn't believe any of it. She told herself it was all just superstition, a way for the locals to keep people away from the lake at night. But with every step she took, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching her. Her footsteps echoed eerily on the empty shore, and that's when she first heard it. It was faint at first, like the wind, but it was there, a whisper, low and guttural, almost like a voice calling her name. Emily stopped in her tracks. Her heart thudded in her chest. Her breath caught in her throat as she tried to make sense of what she had just heard. She spun around, but there was no one there. No one but the lake, dark and still, stretching endlessly into the mist. She forced a nervous laugh, trying to calm her racing heart. It was just the wind, she told herself. It was probably a trick of the fog, or maybe even her imagination. She turned back toward the shore and kept walking, her footsteps now quickening as she tried to shake off the unease. The whispers in the wind continued, but they seemed to grow louder, more distinct, as if they were coming from all directions at once. Emily, the voice seemed to call again, this time louder, more insistent. She froze, her blood running cold. Her name, clear and unmistakable, floated on the breeze. It wasn't a friendly voice. There was something unnatural about it, something wrong. Her heart pounded, and she turned around once more, but again, there was no one. The shore was empty. The fog swallowed everything, leaving only a blur of the black water and the faint outline of the trees. She felt her hands start to shake, her breath shallow and quick as panic began to rise in her chest. This was ridiculous. It had to be a trick. Maybe someone was playing a prank, hiding in the trees and trying to scare her. Emily tried to shake off the feeling of dread that settled over her. She focused on the sound of the waves crashing against the shore, trying to ground herself in reality. But no matter how hard she tried, something felt terribly off. It was as if the very air around her had changed, thickened, become charged with an energy she couldn't understand. And then she saw it. A shadow moved along the edge of the water, too quick to be human, too close to be safe. It was just a flicker at first, something small in the distance. But it was enough to make her blood run cold. She squinted, her heart thumping in her chest as she tried to focus on the dark shape. It was tall, thin, its form barely distinguishable from the black water. But the movement was unmistakable. It was moving with purpose, creeping along the shore like a predator stalking its prey. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She took a step back, her eyes never leaving the shadow. It seemed to move in and out of the fog, like it was made of the mist itself. Her mind raced, trying to rationalize what she was seeing. It had to be someone else, right? Someone else out here, walking along the shore like she was. But this figure, it didn't walk like a person. It glided, almost as if it didn't touch the ground. A chill ran through her, sharper than the cold of the night. The whispering began again, low and drawn out, like something was calling to her from the depths of the lake. Her feet felt rooted to the ground, as though the earth beneath her was holding her in place. The more she tried to move, the more she felt an invisible force pushing her back toward the shore, toward the lake. The shadow moved again, closer this time, and Emily's heart raced in her chest. There was no mistaking it now. The thing, whatever it was not human. It was something else, something dark and sinister, something that had been waiting in the shadows for far too long. Before she could turn and run, the shadow lunged. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the fog, by the lake, by the very night itself. And just like that, everything went silent. The world went dark. Emily's body went cold. Her heart stopped, and for a brief moment, she felt the icy grip of the lake's deadly embrace. And then, nothing. The lake had claimed another victim, and the legend of the Stalker of Lake Michigan grew stronger, fed by the fear and the whispers that would never die. Emily tried to push it out of her mind, to tell herself that it was all in her head. Maybe the fog was playing tricks on her. Maybe her mind was simply overreacting to the creepy atmosphere of the lake. But even as she walked quickly along the shore, the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave her. It hung in the air like a thick, suffocating presence, a dark shadow at the edge of her awareness that refused to let her be. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see someone, maybe another late-night walker or a fisherman returning to shore. But the path was empty. There was nothing but the mist and the dark expanse of the lake. The feeling, though, didn't go away. It only grew stronger, like an invisible hand hovering just above her, waiting to fall. She had heard stories about the lake before, the legends and the warnings, but she had never taken them seriously. This wasn't supposed to happen. The lake wasn't supposed to be alive. It wasn't supposed to feel like it had its own pulse, like it was breathing with her, watching her every move. Her heart raced, her pace quickening as the air seemed to thicken around her. She could feel the coldness of the night creeping deeper into her bones, the fog becoming even denser, so much so that it felt like it was closing in on her. She tried to ignore it, pushing forward, thinking about how ridiculous she was being, how she should just laugh it off, get to her car, and go home. But something wasn't right. The more she told herself that, the more that gnawing feeling refused to go away. And then, just as she reached a point where she felt like she couldn't take it anymore, she felt it. The unmistakable sensation of something cold and clammy pressing against the back of her neck. A hand. Not a tap, not a light touch, but a firm, icy grip that felt like it had come straight from the depths of the lake itself. The cold seared through her like a shock of electricity, and an overwhelming wave of panic flooded her chest. Her pulse raced, her breath caught in her throat, and she felt like she couldn't move, like the air itself was too heavy to allow her to take another step. With a strangled gasp, Emily spun around, her legs almost giving out from under her as she whipped her body in the direction of the cold touch. Her mind screamed for her to look, to confront whatever was there, but when she turned, there was nothing. No one. Just the dark, still water and the fog that seemed to swirl in every direction, as if mocking her with its emptiness. The breath she had been holding rushed out of her in a shaky exhale, and her hands trembled at her sides. Her heart pounded against her ribs, every beat like a drum in her ears. She could feel her chest tightening, the air growing even more suffocating, as if the lake was pulling all the oxygen from the atmosphere. She glanced around frantically, her eyes darting to the trees, the path ahead, searching for some sign of movement. The lake was eerily still, the fog rolling over the water like a blanket that concealed everything. Emily stood there, frozen, not knowing whether to scream or to run. She tried to shake off the feeling, tried to convince herself it was just her imagination, just the lingering effects of fear. But the icy coldness, the hand that had been there, was real, and she couldn't explain it. Her mind raced as she stood there, desperate for an explanation. But there was nothing but the oppressive silence, broken only by the sound of her own panicked breathing. And then, that's when she saw it. A figure. At first, it was barely more than a silhouette, just a shape in the distance that seemed to blend with the mist. But as Emily's eyes focused, it became clearer. A tall figure, thin and elongated, standing motionless, just beyond the water's edge. She squinted, trying to make out more details, but it was like the figure was made of the fog itself, its edges blurry, undefined. The longer she stared at it, the more she could feel it. Those eyes, staring at her from beneath the mist, locked onto her with a cold intensity that made her skin crawl. She couldn't see the figure's face, couldn't make out any details beyond the tall, shadowy shape. But she could feel its gaze, as if it were digging into her very soul. A chill ran down Emily's spine, and a wave of nausea washed over her. She wanted to look away, to run, but her body wouldn't move. Her legs felt heavy, like they were made of stone, and her chest felt tight with fear. The figure didn't move, didn't shift or step forward. but the air around it felt charged, suffocating in a way that she couldn't explain. It was as if the figure was a part of the lake itself, something that had risen from its depths and was now standing, waiting, watching. The longer she stood there, the more that feeling of being trapped washed over her. She wasn't alone. The lake wasn't just a body of water. It was something far worse. And the thing standing just beyond the water's edge wasn't human. It was then that the breath in her chest became harder to control, her body trembling with every exhale. The figure didn't move, but Emily could feel it closing in on her, as if the distance between them was shrinking. No matter how far she tried to move away, it wasn't the distance that was changing. It was her perception, her reality, bending and twisting in ways she couldn't understand. The figure remained as still as ever, yet Emily felt the weight of its presence pressing down on her, growing stronger with every passing second. Her mind screamed at her to move, to get away from the lake, to run back to her car and never look back. But her body was paralyzed, frozen in place by some invisible force that kept her rooted to the spot. She couldn't look away, couldn't tear her eyes from the figure that seemed to be waiting for something, as if it was biding its time, knowing it had all the time in the world. Her mind raced, and then a thought struck her. This was it. This was the Stalker of Lake Michigan. This was the thing that everyone had warned her about. The thing that had claimed so many others before her. It wasn't a legend. It was real. And now it was here, in front of her, its eyes boring into her like twin daggers. The figure's presence felt suffocating, and Emily's instinct kicked in. She couldn't stay here. She couldn't let it get closer. She had to run. She had to get away before it was too late. Without thinking, she turned on her heel and sprinted away, her feet pounding against the gravel path, her lungs burning as she gasped for breath. She didn't dare look back, not even once. The only thing that mattered now was putting as much distance between herself and the lake as possible. The fog seemed to close in on her, blurring everything, making it impossible to see where she was going. Every step she took felt heavier, like the very ground was pulling her back toward the lake, urging her to return. But she pushed on, her heart hammering in her chest, her feet moving faster than they ever had before. Emily didn't dare stop. She didn't dare look back. All she knew was that the figure was still there, watching her from the shore. And no matter how fast she ran, it would always be there, waiting in the depths of the lake. The following day, Emily woke up with a heavy weight on her chest, the events of the night before still fresh in her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still see the figure by the water, its dark presence looming over her. She could still feel the cold hand on her shoulder, the icy grip that had paralyzed her with fear. The sense of being watched, of being hunted, hadn't left her. It was as if the lake itself was waiting for her, waiting for the moment to claim her, just as it had done to so many others. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming for her, something far worse than the nightmarish images in her mind. When she met up with her friends, they brushed off her story with laughter and dismissive gestures. They thought it was a joke, or perhaps they assumed it was just a product of her overactive imagination. After all, they hadn't experienced what she had. They hadn't felt the weight of the lake's presence, the terror that had gripped her in a way that words could never explain. They teased her about the spooky tales she had heard as a kid, about the Stalker of Lake Michigan being nothing more than a ghost story meant to keep children from wandering too far at night. To them, the whole thing was just another scary story, nothing more than a shadow in the fog. But Emily knew the truth, or at least part of it, which she had seen, or rather what she had felt, was real. It wasn't a trick of the light or a figment of her imagination. The figure by the water had been there, watching her, waiting for something. And the chill she had felt, that icy hand on her shoulder, those sensations were far too real to ignore. She couldn't just forget about it, not when the fear still gripped her every time she closed her eyes. No, she had to know more. She had to find answers, even if they came at a cost. So, she made her way to the one place she hoped could provide those answers. The old woman's house sat on the outskirts of town, a small cottage that had been there long before Emily was born. The woman, Mrs. Harper, was a local historian, a woman who had lived in the area for decades. She knew the town's history better than anyone, including the stories that no one liked to talk about. Emily had heard whispers that Mrs. Harper was more than just a historian. Some said she had seen things, experienced things, that had left her with knowledge most people didn't have, things that weren't meant to be known. When Emily arrived at Mrs. Harper's house, the old woman greeted her with a knowing look, as if she had been expecting her. There was no surprise in her eyes, only a kind of sad understanding, as if she had seen this all before. The cottage smelled of old books, dried herbs, and something faintly sweet, like lavender. Mrs. Harper motioned for Emily to sit, her gnarled hands moving gracefully despite her age. Emily took a seat by the small fireplace, the warmth of the fire a stark contrast to the coldness that still lingered inside her. "Tell me what happened, child," Mrs. Harper said softly, her voice calm but laced with something darker, something that made the hair on the back of Emily's neck stand on end. Emily took a deep breath and recounted everything she had experienced the night before. She spoke of the fog, the eerie whispers, the figure by the water, and the overwhelming feeling of being watched. She told Mrs. Harper everything, every detail, even the parts that made her sound insane. She knew no one else would believe her, but she hoped the old woman would. As Emily spoke, Mrs. Harper sat in silence, listening intently, her eyes never leaving Emily's face. Her expression didn't change. It was calm, but there was something behind her eyes, a quiet sorrow, a hint of knowing that Emily couldn't quite place. When Emily finished, the old woman sighed, a deep, mournful sound that seemed to echo in the small room. "You've seen it, haven't you?" Mrs. Harper asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily nodded, her throat tight. She didn't have the words to explain it, not in a way that made sense. The experience was too overwhelming, too terrifying to put into a neat explanation. "The Stalker of Lake Michigan," Mrs. Harper said softly, almost to herself. "It's not a ghost, not a legend. It's something far older than that, something much darker." Emily's heart skipped a beat at the mention of the name. "What do you mean? What is it?" Mrs. Harper's gaze turned distant, as if she were seeing something far away, something from the past. The stalker is not a spirit. It is a curse, bound to the very waters of the lake. It has existed for as long as anyone can remember, and it will continue to exist long after we're gone. It is not a creature, not a ghost, but a force that hunts those who dare to come too close. Once it marks you, it never lets go. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. "A curse?" she repeated, her voice trembling. "How? How does it choose its victims?" Mrs. Harper met Emily's eyes, her expression grim. "The lake is old. Older than the town, older than the stories we tell about it. There are things in the depths, things that are not meant to be disturbed. The stalker is one of them. It doesn't follow the rules of the living or the dead. It seeks out those who stray too close to the lake after dark. It feeds off fear, off the energy of those who wander its shores without understanding what they're walking into." Emily's mind raced as she processed the woman's words. A curse, a force bound to the lake. It all sounded so unbelievable, yet deep inside, she knew that what Mrs. Harper was saying was the truth. Everything she had experienced, the figure by the water, the whispers, the coldness, it all fit. She had been marked, just as the woman had said. "But why me?" Emily whispered. "Why now?" Mrs. Harper's eyes softened with sympathy. "It doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care if you're young or old, if you're good or bad. The lake claims what it wants, when it wants. And once you're marked, you can't escape. It will follow you, always. You may think you've escaped, but it's already waiting, and it will come for you when you least expect it." Emily's throat tightened, her mind spinning with fear. "What can I do? How do I get rid of it?" Mrs. Harper paused, her hands folded in her lap, and for a long moment, she said nothing. When she finally spoke, her voice was heavy with warning. "You can't get rid of it. Once you're marked, you can't escape. But you can leave. Leave the lake. Leave this place before it comes for you. It will follow you until it has what it wants." Emily's heart sank. She had hoped there was a way out, a way to escape, but the woman's words made it clear that she had no choice. If she stayed, the stalker would come for her, and there was no telling what it would do once it had her. "You should leave, child," Mrs. Harper said softly, "before it's too late." The warning hung in the air, suffocating and final. Emily's mind raced, her thoughts a whirlwind of fear and uncertainty. She had never believed in curses, never believed in the supernatural. But now, with everything she had experienced, with everything Mrs. Harper had said, she knew she had no choice. The stalker was real, and it was coming for her. She had to leave, and she had to leave now. Days passed, and though Emily tried to continue with her life as best as she could, the experience by the lake never left her. The warning from Mrs. Harper echoed in her mind constantly, each word a heavy weight that seemed to grow heavier with time. The fear that had clutched her the night she'd seen the figure, felt the cold hand on her shoulder, lingered. It gnawed at her from the inside out. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind that rattled the windows. It all seemed to be a sign, a reminder that something was waiting for her. She couldn't sleep. The nights were the worst. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt a chill settle over her, as though the darkness itself was alive, breathing down her neck. She could feel the lake, distant though it was, still holding its grip on her. The oppressive feeling that something was just out of her sight, watching, never seemed to fade. Her thoughts, once clear and uncomplicated, had become tangled in the fear that the curse had already taken root within her. At school, her friends noticed the change in her. She wasn't the same energetic, carefree girl she used to be. She couldn't focus on anything for long. She didn't laugh like she used to. Her friends tried to talk to her about it, but Emily couldn't bring herself to explain. How could she? How could she possibly explain what she had experienced when she wasn't even sure she understood it herself? They didn't believe her anyway. They'd only laugh it off, just like they had done when she first told them about the lake. They would never understand. It had been a week since she'd visited Mrs. Harper, and the weight of her warning hung over her like a storm cloud, threatening to break at any moment. Emily had tried to push it all aside, to live as if nothing had happened, but it was becoming impossible. The more she tried to ignore it, the stronger the pull became. It wasn't just the feeling of being watched anymore. It was the constant sense of impending doom, like the air was thick with something she couldn't see, but could always feel. And it was always there, always lurking. It was on a cool evening, as Emily walked home from the store, that she felt it again. The breeze was heavier than usual, carrying with it an almost tangible sense of dread. The streets were quiet, the usual noise of traffic and people gone, as if the world itself had gone still. The fog had begun to creep in once more, rolling in from the lake like a slow, deliberate wave. The shadows seemed deeper, the night darker. She hugged her jacket tighter around her shoulders. But the cold seemed to seep into her bones, no matter how she tried to warm herself. She was halfway down the block when it came again. That whisper. It wasn't just the wind this time, she realized. The voice was clear, unmistakable, and it was calling her name. Emily. The sound sent a chill through her entire body. It was soft at first, barely audible, like a breath in her ear. But it was there, unmistakable. She froze in her tracks, her pulse quickening. Her breath caught in her throat as the world around her seemed to go silent. The wind, the rustling leaves, everything faded. There was only the voice, low, guttural, and somehow full of malice. Emily. Her skin prickled with goosebumps, and she instinctively looked around. She was standing in the middle of the street now, her heart pounding in her chest. The streets were empty. There was no one in sight. Nothing but the faint glow of streetlights, casting long, twisted shadows across the pavement. Her mind screamed at her to run, to get out of there, but she couldn't move. She couldn't even breathe. And then, from the darkness, it emerged, a figure. Tall, thin, and shadowed, just like the one she had seen by the lake. It was standing at the far end of the street, its form indistinct but unmistakable. Emily could feel it. Her heart raced, the blood pounding in her ears as her legs felt like they were made of lead. The figure didn't move. It simply stood there, just beyond the reach of the streetlight, its face hidden in the darkness, its body cloaked in the same shifting fog that seemed to cling to the night. The whisper came again, louder now, closer. Emily. Her body trembled, and a wave of nausea washed over her. She wanted to scream, wanted to run, but her legs were frozen. She couldn't make herself move. Her eyes locked on the figure, trying desperately to make sense of what was happening. Was it really the same figure from the lake? Or was this just a trick of her mind? But then it took a step forward. Slow, deliberate. The footfall was almost silent, but Emily could feel it. It was as if the earth itself was trembling beneath her. She finally found her voice, her breath a ragged whisper. "Who are you?" The figure didn't answer. Instead, it moved closer. Emily's heart hammered harder, the fear suffocating her. It was real. It had come for her, just like Mrs. Harper had warned. Without thinking, Emily spun on her heel and ran. She didn't look back. Her feet pounded against the pavement, her breath coming in short, desperate gasps as she pushed herself harder, faster. The streets blurred in her vision, the world around her spinning in the panic. She had to get away. She had to escape. But the further she ran, the closer the figure seemed to get. The air grew heavier, thicker with each step she took, as though the fog itself were closing in around her. The wind picked up, howling in her ears, drowning out everything except the pounding of her heart and the sound of her own ragged breathing. The figure was following her. The distance between them seemed to shrink with every frantic step Emily took. Her lungs burned with the effort, but she didn't dare slow down. She couldn't. She could feel it. The darkness was right behind her, too close now to ignore. The figure was gaining on her, and no matter how fast she ran, no matter how far she pushed herself, she could feel its presence, looming over her like an inescapable shadow. She had been marked. She had made the mistake of walking too close to the lake, of ignoring the warning. Now, there was no escape. The whisper came again, this time right behind her. A breath on her neck. "Emily." And that's when she felt it, cold fingers brushing against her skin, just before the world went black. The hunt had begun. Emily's life had become a constant nightmare. No matter where she went, no matter how fast she ran, the stalker was always there. It followed her in the shadows, lurking just beyond her sight, its presence never far behind. It wasn't just in the physical world. It haunted her in her dreams, where the fog twisted and the figure stood waiting, always waiting, as if it were just an extension of her own fear. Each night, she woke up in cold sweats, the feeling of its eyes still pressing into her, never allowing her to escape. The more she tried to forget it, the more it consumed her thoughts. Her friends had noticed the change. They told her she looked pale, that she had bags under her eyes, that she seemed different. But how could she explain to them what was happening? How could she tell them that the lake had a hold on her, that the curse was real, that something dark and ancient had claimed her? She couldn't escape. The whispers continued. They grew louder, more insistent. It was as though the figure was trying to drag her back to the lake, to force her to confront whatever it was that had marked her. She couldn't ignore it any longer. She knew what she had to do. She had to face the thing that was hunting her, or it would never stop. She would never be free. Desperate, she returned to the lake, the place where it had all started, where the curse had taken root. She had avoided it for days, trying to push the fear away, but it was useless. The lake called to her. It pulled at her soul, a silent, invisible force that wouldn't let her go. It was a moonless night when she arrived. The fog, thick and heavy, rolling over the water in long, ghostly tendrils. The air was colder than she had ever felt it, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in an instant. The lake stretched before her, dark and endless, the surface of the water as still as glass. The sounds of the town were far behind her now, swallowed by the darkness. There was only the lake, only the void. Emily stood at the edge of the water, staring out at the horizon, where the mist seemed to merge with the blackness of the sky. Her heart raced in her chest, each beat a frantic reminder that she was standing on the precipice, about to face whatever evil had followed her all this time. The figure had to be here. She could feel it. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faintest whisper, too quiet to make out at first. But then it grew, curling around her like a snake, its voice carrying the same familiar low tone. Emily. The chill ran deeper now, colder than anything she had ever felt. She shivered, but it wasn't from the air. It was the lake reaching out to her, calling to her with an insatiable hunger. She was not alone. She would never be alone again. And then it appeared. The figure emerged from the fog, as if it had materialized from the very lake itself. Tall and thin, its outline indistinct, like it was made of shadow, an extension of the mist that clung to the water's surface. Emily's heart slammed in her chest as she stared at it. It didn't move. It didn't speak. But she could feel its presence as clearly as if it had wrapped its hands around her throat. She could feel its eyes, hollow and dead, boring into her, watching her with a coldness that sent ice into her veins. She stepped backward, her body trembling, her breath shallow. The voice in her mind grew louder, more insistent. "You're not alone anymore," it whispered. But this time, it wasn't coming from the wind. It was coming from inside her own head, curling around her thoughts, tightening its grip on her mind. Emily closed her eyes for a brief moment, trying to calm herself, to push the terror back, but it was no use. She knew deep down that there was no escape from this. The curse had already claimed her. It had marked her, and it would never let go. The lake would never let go. Her feet moved without her consent, her body taking a step toward the water. The cold was unbearable now, the air thick with a sense of finality. The figure remained still, its form barely visible in the fog, but its presence loomed large. She could hear the slow, steady pulse of her own heartbeat, louder than the wind or the waves. And then, with a surge of defiance, Emily stepped into the water. A coldness hit her like a shock, biting into her skin, seeping into her bones. The water was deeper than she expected, quickly swallowing her ankles, then her calves, then her knees, as she waded further into the lake. Every step felt like a weight, dragging her further into the depths. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. The figure didn't move. It simply watched. The silence was deafening, a hollow space where nothing existed except for her and the lake, a coldness and the darkness. When the water reached her waist, she felt it, the pressure, the pull, something tugging at her from beneath the surface, dragging at her legs, urging her to go deeper. She could feel it now, the lake's thirst for her, the curse that had been placed upon her the moment she set foot near its shores. And then it lunged. The figure was faster than she had ever imagined. It moved like a shadow, like something not bound by the laws of the world. its form stretched, elongated, reaching toward her with unnatural speed. Emily gasped, her breath catching in her throat as she felt it coming for her. She knew it was too late to run, too late to escape. But instead of pulling her under, the figure stopped. It froze, hovering in the air just a few feet from her, its empty eyes locked onto hers. Emily's chest tightened, her heart thundering in her ears. She didn't move. She couldn't. The figure's gaze seemed to paralyze her, as though its very presence had locked her in place. "You belong to the lake now," it whispered, its voice a hollow, guttural sound that reverberated in her skull. The words sent a shiver through her that was colder than the water itself, colder than the fear that had been slowly eating away at her. And then there was silence. The kind of silence that rang louder than anything else. The water around her was still. The figure was still. The wind had stopped. There was no more whisper, no more fear. There was only the empty, suffocating silence of the lake. And then Emily felt it. The weight lifting from her chest, the unbearable pressure subsiding. She wasn't sure if she had escaped or if she had been consumed. But the lake had claimed her. It had taken her. The Stalker of Lake Michigan never left Emily. It never let her go. And so the legend continued to grow, whispered among the locals who dared to venture too close to the water. Those who were brave, or foolish, enough to ignore the warnings. They spoke of the curse, of the relentless stalking presence that waited just beyond the fog, of the ones who had been marked, of the souls that the lake had taken. And always in the back of their minds, they knew the truth. Death comes for the unwary.